The stars looked the same as they always did, cold points of light against the endless black of space. But Commander Vexhai knew something was different today. His ship's sensors had found something that shouldn't be there. "Show me the readings." "Again," Vexhai said to his science officer. His voice echoed strangely in the crystal chambers of the Caltharan exploration ship. The walls around them glowed with soft blue light, casting long shadows across their tall, thin forms. Officer Kel Nara's fingers danced over the control panel. Her movements were quick and precise, just like all Caltharans. "The energy signature appeared 3 hours ago, Commander. It's not moving, just floating in empty space between the 7th and 8th star systems." Vexhai studied the display. Numbers and symbols flowed across the screen in patterns that would confuse most species. But to a Caltharan, it told a clear story. Something big was out there. Something that didn't belong to any race they knew. "How big?" he asked. "The object is massive, sir. At least 3 kilometers long, maybe more." Kelnara paused, checking her readings again. "Commander, the energy patterns don't match anything in our databases. Not Caltharan, not Zephyrian, not even the old Maker ruins we found last year." This made Vexahai's crystalline features brighten with interest. In his 200 years of exploration, he had seen many strange things in space. Dead worlds, ancient machines, ships from races that died out long ago, but finding something completely unknown was rare. Very rare. "Set course for the object," he ordered, "and send word to the other ships in our fleet. Tell them we may have found something important." The Caltharan exploration fleet was small, only 5 ships, each designed for long journeys into unknown space. They had been mapping this sector for months, looking for new worlds and new forms of life. It was peaceful work, safe work, the kind that Caltharans were good at. But as they approached the mysterious object, Vexhai began to feel something he rarely experienced: fear. The thing floating in space was like nothing he had ever seen. It was huge, dark, and covered in strange markings. Parts of its surface looked melted or burned. Long scars ran along its sides as if something with giant claws had tried to tear it apart. "By the crystal throne," whispered Kelnara. "What happened to it?" Vexhai could only stare. The object was clearly a ship, but it looked like it had been through a war. A long, terrible war. Every surface showed signs of damage. Holes had been punched through the hull and patched with different materials. Weapon marks covered the sides. Some areas looked like they had been rebuilt many times. "Can you read any of the markings on the hull?" Vexhai asked. Kelnara worked at her station, trying to focus the ship's cameras on the strange symbols. "I'm getting some images now, Commander. The markings appear to be letters, but not from any language our computers know." The main screen showed a close-up view of the ship's side. Large symbols had been painted there in white, though much of the paint had worn away. The letters were simple, straight lines and curves, almost crude compared to the flowing script that Caltharans used. "UES Perseverance," Kelnara read slowly, sounding out each letter. And below that, Terra, Sol System. "Terra," Vexhai repeated. "Sol System. I've never heard of either." "Neither have I, sir. But wait, there's more." She pointed to another part of the ship. "Those symbols there, they look like numbers. And that section appears to be some kind of identification marker." Vexhai studied the images for a long time. The ship was clearly very old. Its design was unlike anything in the known galaxy, but it was still intact, still in one piece despite all the damage. "Life signs?" he asked, scanning now. Kelnara's fingers moved quickly over her controls. "Commander, this is strange. I'm detecting breathable atmosphere inside the ship. Temperature is cold, but not freezing. And there are energy readings, faint but steady." "Life signs," Vexhai repeated. "That's the strange part, sir. I'm reading life signs, but they're inactive. Like the beings inside are sleeping. Deep sleeping." Vexhai felt his skin tingle. In Caltharan culture, Deep sleeping usually meant death. But these readings suggested something else. Something impossible. How many? He asked quietly. 1,000, sir. Exactly 1,000 life forms inside that ship. The bridge fell silent. Even the soft humming of the ship's systems seemed to quiet down. 1,000 beings, sleeping in the dark, between stars. How long had they been there? Where had they come from? And what had happened to their ship? Commander, Kelnara said, her voice uncertain. Should we contact them? Vexhai thought about this. His people were explorers, yes, but they were also careful. They had rules about contact with unknown species, rules that had kept them safe for thousands of years. Try sending a basic greeting signal, he decided. Low power, non-threatening. They waited for 10 minutes, then 20, then an hour. The ancient ship stayed silent. No response, Kelnara reported. But Commander, I'm detecting some kind of automatic systems working inside the ship. Life support is running. Power is flowing to different sections. It's like the ship is maintaining itself. Maintaining itself for what? I don't know, sir. Vexhai made a decision that would change everything. Prepare a boarding team. We're going aboard. Sir. Kelnara's voice rose in surprise. Is that wise? We don't know anything about this ship or its occupants. Exactly why we need to investigate. This could be the greatest discovery in Caltheron. History. We can't just leave it floating here. The boarding team consisted of 6 Caltherons, all experienced in first contact situations. They wore protective suits and carried translation devices. Their weapons were set to non-lethal settings. Everything was done according to proper exploration protocols. The ancient ship had an airlock, though it took some time to figure out how to operate it. The design was completely different from anything they knew. Simple mechanical systems instead of the energy fields that most races used. When the airlock finally opened, they found themselves in a corridor that seemed to stretch forever. Emergency lights cast a red glow over everything. The walls were made of metal, painted in dull colors that had faded over time. Strange writing covered many surfaces. The gravity is working, reported team leader Morthos. Atmosphere is breathable, though it smells old. They moved carefully through the ship, taking readings and recording everything they saw. The corridors were wider than what Caltherans would use. The ceilings were lower. Everything suggested that the ship's builders had been different from them in basic ways. Commander, Morthos called over the communication link. We've found something. A large chamber filled with containers. Hundreds of them. Containers? They appear to be sleeping chambers, sir, with beings inside. Vexhai felt his breathing quicken. Are they alive? The readings suggest yes. They're in some kind of deep hibernation. Their life signs are very slow, but steady. Can you see what they look like? There was a pause. Then Morthos spoke again, his voice strange. Commander, I think you need to see this for yourself. An hour later, Vexhai floated in the corridor of the ancient ship, staring at something impossible. The hibernation chamber was huge, filled with rows and rows of sleeping pods. Each pod held a being unlike anything he had ever seen. They were smaller than Caltherans. Their skin was soft and pale, not crystalline. They had hair on their heads in different colors. Their faces were flat with small features. But what struck Vexhai most was how they looked even while sleeping. Their faces showed lines of stress and worry. Their hands, visible through the clear pod covers, were scarred and rough. What are they? Whispered Kelnara, who had joined the boarding team. I don't know, Vexhai admitted. But look at their clothing. The sleeping beings wore identical outfits, dark colors with patches and symbols sewn on. The material looked tough and practical. Not the kind of clothes worn for ceremony or comfort. These looked like work clothes. Or maybe military uniforms, Morthos said, reading Vexhai's thoughts. These are soldiers. They found more evidence as they explored the ship. Weapon storage areas, though the weapons were gone or locked away. Training facilities. Medical bays equipped for treating battle injuries. Maps showing star systems that none of them recognized. But the most disturbing discovery was in the ship's databanks. The computers were still working, though they used technology that was thousands of years out of date. The information was stored in formats that required special programs to read. "I'm getting some translation now," Kelnara reported as they worked in what appeared to be the ship's bridge. "The language is called English, and these beings call themselves humans." "Humans," Vexhai repeated. "I've never heard of this race." "Neither have I. But Commander, look at these records. This ship's logs go back over 3,000 years. 3,000 years? Vexhai stared at the display. "That's impossible. No one has hibernation technology that good." "Apparently they do or did." Kelnara continued working at the human computer station. "Sir, I'm finding references to something called the Sol system, and a planet called Earth. But none of this matches anything in our star charts. Maybe it's from another galaxy? Possible, but Commander, there's something else. These logs mention a war. A big war, and something called..." She paused, checking the translation again. "The hive consciousness." Vexhai felt cold suddenly. "What kind of war?" "I'm still working on the translation, but it appears these humans were fleeing from something that had destroyed their home worlds. This ship, the Perseverance, was part of something called a colonial fleet. They were looking for a new home, and they've been sleeping for 3,000 years. "Yes, sir." "Waiting." "Waiting for what?" Kelnara didn't answer immediately. She kept working at the computer, her face growing more concerned with each new piece of information she uncovered. "Commander," she finally said, "I think they were waiting for the enemy to stop following them." Vexhai looked around the bridge of the ancient human ship. Everything about it spoke of preparation for war. The design was functional, not beautiful, built for survival, not comfort. These humans, whoever they were, had been running from something terrible enough to make them sleep for thousands of years. "Should we wake one of them?" Morthus asked. It was a good question, a dangerous question. Waking an unknown alien was always risky, but leaving them asleep meant they would never learn the truth about this mysterious ship and its cargo of sleeping warriors. "Choose one," Vexhai decided. "Someone who appears to be a leader. We'll revive them carefully and see what they can tell us." As his team prepared for the revival process, Vexhai couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to change everything. The galaxy had been at peace for centuries. Different races traded and explored together. Wars were rare and small, but this ship and its sleeping humans suggested a different kind of history. One where entire civilizations could be destroyed. One where the survivors had to run so far that they left the galaxy itself behind. What had these humans been running from? And more importantly, was it still out there, waiting in the dark between stars? The questions would have to wait. For now, they had 1,000 sleeping warriors to deal with. Warriors from a race that had been forgotten by history. Warriors who might hold the key to secrets that the galaxy had never imagined. As the first human began to wake up, Vexhai wondered if they were making the right choice. Some knowledge was dangerous. Some secrets were better left buried. But it was too late now. The ancient ship had been found. The sleeping humans would wake. And whatever they brought with them from their long, dark dreams would soon become everyone's problem. The age of peaceful exploration was about to end. The first thing Sarah Chen felt was cold. Deep, bone-crushing cold that seemed to come from inside her body. The second thing was pain. Every muscle screamed as if she had been sleeping on rocks for years, which she realized dimly might not be far from the truth. She tried to open her eyes, but the light was too bright. Everything was white and sharp and wrong. This wasn't the inside of her hibernation pod. This wasn't the Perseverance's medical bay. Where was she? "Easy," said a voice. It sounded strange. The words were English, but the accent was completely wrong, like someone learning the language from old recordings. "You are safe." Sarah forced her eyes open and immediately wished she hadn't. Tall figures stood around her bed. They looked like living crystal statues, their bodies catching the light and throwing it back in rainbow patterns. Their faces were angular and sharp, with features that seemed carved rather than grown. She tried to sit up, but strong hands pressed her back down. Gentle hands, but definitely not human. Where? Her voice came out as a croak. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Where am I? You are on Caltharan medical vessel, one of the crystal beings said. His voice was deep but musical. My name is Commander Vex-HFY. We found your ship. Sarah's mind raced, trying to remember. The perseverance, the evacuation of Earth, the long sleep that was supposed to last only a few years while they found a new home. But something had gone wrong. The sensors had detected pursuit. They had been forced to go deeper into hibernation, waiting for the enemy to lose their trail. How long? She whispered. The commander exchanged glances with his companions. Even through her confusion, Sarah could tell this was not going to be good news. We believe you have been sleeping for approximately 2,847 of your years, he said carefully. Sarah stared at him. The number was so large it didn't make sense at first. Then it hit her like a physical blow. Nearly 3,000 years. Everyone she had ever known was dead. Earth was ancient. History. The colonies they had been trying to protect were dust. That's impossible, she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was true. The hibernation pods were designed to last that long if necessary. It had been a desperate measure for desperate times. I am sorry, Commander Vex-HFY said. We know this must be difficult news. Sarah forced herself to focus. She was a military officer. She had been trained for situations like this. Not exactly like this, but close enough. First rule, gather intelligence. Find out what the situation was. My crew, she said. The others on my ship. Are they alive? Yes. All 1,000 of your people are still in hibernation. You were the only one we revived. 1,000. She remembered now. The Perseverance had carried the survivors from 12 different military units. The best soldiers humanity had produced. They were supposed to be the seed of a new human colony somewhere safe from the war. Why did you wake me? She asked. Your hibernation pod was marked with command insignia. We assumed you were a leader. Sarah almost laughed. Command insignia. She'd been a captain in the Colonial Defense Force. But after 3,000 years, she might be the highest-ranking human left alive in the universe. I need to see my ship, she said, trying to sit up again. That may not be wise. You have been asleep for a very long time. Your body needs to recover. Commander, Sarah said, using the tone that had gotten results from subordinates across a dozen star systems. I need to see my ship now. Something in her voice must have convinced him. An hour later, she was floating in a Caltharan transport pod, looking at the Perseverance through the viewport. Her ship looked exactly as she remembered it. Battle-scarred, patched, and worn, but intact. It had been her home for the last desperate years of the war. We have been studying your vessel, Commander Vex-HFY explained. Your technology is impressive, very different from ours. Sarah looked at the Caltharan ship around her. Everything was smooth curves and flowing lines, beautiful but not built for war. The Perseverance looked crude by comparison, but it had been designed for one purpose: survival. You said you found us, she said. Where exactly are we? In what you would call neutral space, between star systems. Your ship was drifting without power to the engines. And where are we in relation to Earth? Another uncomfortable pause. We are not familiar with your Earth. Our records go back many thousands of years, but we have no mention of humans or your soul system. Sarah felt something cold in her stomach. What do you mean? In our historical records, there is no trace of your species. It is as if humans never existed in this part of the galaxy. That's impossible. We had colonies on dozens of worlds. We had trade agreements with half a dozen alien species. There were billions of us. Commander Vex-HFY was quiet for a moment. Captain Chen, May I ask what happened to your people? Why were you fleeing? Sarah closed her eyes. She had hoped never to tell this story again, but if these Kaltharans were telling the truth, if humanity really had vanished from history, then someone needed to know what had happened. We were at war, she began. The worst war in galactic history. Our enemy called itself the Hive Consciousness. We have no records of this war. You wouldn't. It ended 3,000 years ago, apparently, and we lost. She told him everything, how the Hive had appeared at the edge of human space, consuming entire worlds, how they had tried diplomacy first, then military action, how they had discovered that the Hive didn't just kill its enemies, it absorbed them. Every person it captured became part of its collective mind. The more it consumed, the smarter it became, Sarah explained. It learned our tactics, our technology, our weaknesses. Every battle made it stronger. And humanity fought this enemy alone? At first we had allies, the Centauri Republic, the Vegan Trade Federation, others. But the Hive consumed them too. In the end it was just us. Commander Vex High listened without interruption. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. This Hive consciousness, he finally said. What happened to it? We don't know. Our last intelligence report suggested it had stopped expanding and was consolidating its territory. We hoped that meant it was satisfied with what it had taken, that it would leave the rest of the galaxy alone. And your people? The ones who could escape did. Colony ships like the Perseverance were sent to different parts of the galaxy. Some went to other galaxies entirely. The plan was to hide until the Hive forgot about us, then rebuild. But you have been asleep for nearly 3,000 years. Yes, we kept detecting pursuit. Ships following us, we had to keep running, keep going deeper. Eventually, we had no choice but to go into deep hibernation and hope we could outlast them. They docked with the Perseverance, and Commander Vex High insisted on touring the ship personally. Sarah led him through corridors she knew better than anywhere else. Everything was exactly as she remembered. The weapon lockers were still sealed. The training facilities still showed signs of their last use. The medical base still had supplies ready for treating battle wounds. Your ship is designed for war, the commander observed. It had to be. We were fighting for our survival. They reached the hibernation bay where her crew still slept. Row after row of pods, each containing a veteran of the war against the Hive. Sarah knew every face. These were the people who had followed her across the galaxy, who had trusted her to find them a safe place to rebuild. They look hard, Commander Vex High said quietly. Sarah looked at her sleeping crew through the clear pod covers. He was right. Even in hibernation, their faces showed the stress of constant warfare. These were people who had seen entire worlds die, who had fought an enemy that turned their friends into weapons against them. We all were by the end, she admitted. The war changed us. We had to become something we never wanted to be. What will you do now? It was a good question. Sarah looked around the hibernation bay, thinking. Her mission had been to find a safe place for her people. But after 3,000 years, the galaxy had changed. Maybe they had finally outrun their past. I need to know more about the current situation, she said. About your people, about who else is out there. If the Hive is really gone, then maybe we can finally stop running. And if it is not gone? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then the galaxy is in more danger than it knows. They returned to the Kaltharan ship for more detailed discussions. Commander Vex High introduced her to his crew and began sharing information about the current state of galactic civilization. What she learned was both encouraging and terrifying. The current galaxy was peaceful. The different races traded with each other and settled disputes through negotiation. Wars were rare and small. Most species had forgotten that large-scale conflict was even possible. You have no military? Sarah asked in amazement. We have security forces, peacekeepers, but nothing like what you described from your war. What? About your weapons technology, your ship defenses? We have some defensive systems, but they are designed to deal with pirates and small raiders. Not, what did you call them? Fleet actions. Sarah felt a chill. The galaxy had become soft in the thousands of years since humanity's war. If the Hive ever returned, these peaceful races would be defenseless. "Commander," she said carefully, "I need to ask you something important. Have there been any reports of ships or signals from outside this galaxy? Any signs of large fleets moving in deep space?" "No. Why do you ask?" "Because the Hive was smart. It learned from every battle. If it defeated humanity, it didn't just stop there. It kept growing, kept expanding. And if it's been growing for 3,000 years..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Commander HFY understood. "You think your enemy might return?" "I think it never left. I think it's been out there, building strength, learning everything it could about the galaxy, and now that it's ready, it's coming back to finish what it started." The commander's crystalline features darkened. "What should we do?" Sarah looked out at the stars through the viewport. Somewhere out there, her enemy might be waiting. The thing that had destroyed her civilization, that had forced her to sleep for 3,000 years while it grew stronger. "First, I need to wake my crew," she said. "If I'm right about the Hive, you're going to need every soldier you can get." "Are you sure that is wise? Your people have been through trauma. They are warriors in a peaceful time." "Commander, if the Hive is coming back, this won't be a peaceful time much longer. And when the shooting starts, you'll want people who know how to fight a war." She turned to face him directly. "The question is, are you prepared for what that means? Because my people aren't just soldiers. They're veterans of the worst war this galaxy has ever seen. They've done things that your peaceful civilization would consider monstrous. But those same things might be the only way to survive what's coming." Commander HFY was quiet for a long time. Finally, he nodded. "Wake them," he said. "We will face whatever comes together." Sarah hoped he meant that, because if the Hive really was returning, the galaxy was about to learn what war truly meant. And her sleeping soldiers were the only ones who might be able to teach them how to survive it. But first, she had to prepare them for a world that had moved on without humanity, a world that had forgotten the price of freedom, a world that was about to remember. The translation took 3 days. 3 days of Caltharan computers working around the clock to decode the massive database stored in the Perseverance's memory banks. 3 days of Sarah Chen sitting in the Caltharan ship's conference room watching alien linguists struggle with concepts their peaceful civilization had never needed to understand. "The word appears frequently," said linguist Taramaya, pointing at symbols on the display. "Kill ratio, but we cannot understand the context." Sarah looked at the screen. It showed a personnel file from her ship's database. The file belonged to Sergeant Maria Santos, one of her best soldiers. The numbers next to Santos's name were staggering, even by wartime standards. "It means how many enemies she destroyed compared to how many of her unit died," Sarah explained quietly. "In warfare, it's a measure of effectiveness." The Caltharans in the room grew quiet. Commander HFY's crystalline features darkened as he processed this information. One person killed hundreds of enemy beings. "The Hive didn't count as individual beings," Sarah said. "They were all part of one consciousness. When you destroyed a Hive unit, you weren't killing a person. You were cutting off a finger from something much larger." But even as she said it, Sarah knew how it sounded. To these peaceful aliens, her people must seem like monsters. And maybe they were right. War had changed all of them in ways that couldn't be undone. The door chimed and another Caltharan entered. This was Senior Archivist Melthar, the expedition's chief historian. His tall frame seemed to vibrate with excitement. "Commander," he announced, "we have made a breakthrough. The human database contains complete historical records, battle logs, tactical analyses, detailed reports of this war they fought." He activated. The main display and images began to flow across the screen. Sarah watched, remembering. Star charts showing human territory. Then the same charts with large sections marked in red. Hive-controlled space. The red areas grew larger with each passing year until they covered most of the known galaxy. According to these records, Melthar continued, the war lasted for 47 standard years. It involved hundreds of star systems and billions of beings. How is that possible? asked Science Officer Kelnara. A war of that scale would be remembered. There would be ruins. Evidence. Sarah stood and approached the display. She touched a control, and the view changed to show detailed battle reports. Ship movements, casualty figures, strategic analyses written in the cold, precise language of military professionals. The hive didn't leave ruins, she said. It consumed everything. Planets, ships, people, knowledge. Everything it touched became part of itself. After the war ended, there was nothing left to show we had ever existed. She called up another file. This one showed the progression of human technology during the war. In the early years, their weapons and ships looked similar to what other peaceful races might build. But as the war continued, the designs became harder, more efficient, more deadly. We had to evolve, Sarah explained. The enemy was learning from every encounter. If we used the same tactics twice, it would be ready for us the third time. We had to become unpredictable, ruthless. The display showed images of later human warships. Unlike the Perseverance, which had been built for exploration and modified. For war, these vessels were designed for one purpose only. They looked like weapons themselves, all sharp angles and redundant systems. Your people changed, Commander Vexhai observed. We had to. The hive was perfect at one thing, consuming other civilizations. It had done it countless times before. We were just another meal to it. Sarah's voice grew harder. But humans are good at one thing too. We adapt. We survive. We find a way. Archivist Melthar brought up more files. These showed the final battles of the war. Human forces retreating system by system. Evacuation fleets carrying survivors to the edges of known space. The desperate last stands that bought time for ships like the Perseverance to escape. The final human stronghold was here, Sarah said, pointing to a star system on the map. New Geneva. It held out for 3 months while the evacuation fleets got away. When it finally fell, organized resistance ended. What happened to the defenders? They were consumed, added to the hive consciousness. Everything they knew, everything they had learned about fighting the hive became part of the enemy. The room fell silent. The Caltharans were beginning to understand the true horror of what humanity had faced. An enemy that grew stronger with every victory, that learned from every defeat, that turned their own people against them. But the war ended, Kelnara said hopefully. The hive stopped expanding. Did it? Sarah called up the final entries in the database. Long-range sensor readings from the evacuation fleets, intelligence reports from the last human spy networks. Look at these readings. The display showed massive energy signatures moving through deep space. Construction projects on a scale that dwarfed anything humans had ever built. Fleet movements involving thousands of ships. This was taken 6 months before we went into hibernation, Sarah explained. The hive wasn't stopping. It was consolidating, building, preparing for something bigger. Preparing for what? We didn't know then. But I have a theory now. Sarah turned to face the assembled Caltharans. Tell me about your galaxy's history. Have there been any major conflicts in the past 3,000 years? Any large-scale wars? No, Commander Vexhai said immediately. The current age has been remarkably peaceful. Trade disputes, yes. Some territorial arguments. But nothing like what you describe. Exactly. Don't you find that strange? In 3,000 years, no race has become aggressive enough to threaten their neighbors? No resource conflicts? No ideological wars? Melthar's features brightened with understanding. You think the hive eliminated potential threats? I think the hive has been busy for 3,000 years, not expanding randomly, but carefully removing any species that might pose a challenge, leaving only the peaceful ones. The implications were staggering. If Sarah was right, the current galactic civilization existed only because the hive had allowed it to exist. Every aggressive race, every potential military threat had been quietly eliminated over the centuries. But why? Asked Kelnara. If the hive is so powerful, why not simply consume everything? Because it learned from fighting us. Sarah said grimly. We taught it that a galaxy of warriors is dangerous. Better to have a galaxy of sheep, ready for harvest when the time comes. She called up more files from the database. These showed human attempts to understand hive psychology and motivations, years of research by their best minds trying to comprehend an enemy that thought in ways no individual being could fully grasp. The hive is patient, she explained. It thinks in terms of thousands of years. It doesn't need to consume everything immediately. It can wait, plan, prepare, let its food sources grow and develop in peace. Food sources, Commander Vexhai repeated quietly. That's all we ever were to it, all any of us were, and now, after 3,000 years of preparation, it's ready for the harvest. The room was silent except for the humming of the ship's systems. The Caltharans were processing information that challenged everything they believed about their peaceful galaxy. Finally, Archivist Melthar spoke up. Even if this is true, what can we do? You said yourself that the hive defeated humanity, and humans were warriors. How can peaceful races like ours hope to resist? Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Because we're not dead yet. She activated another section of the database. This one showed the human evacuation fleets, dozens of ships carrying survivors to different parts of the galaxy and beyond. The Perseverance wasn't the only ship that escaped, she explained. There were others, colony ships, research vessels, military units like mine. We scattered across the galaxy, each going in a different direction. You think they survived? Some of them, yes. Hidden on distant worlds, probably still in hibernation like we were, waiting for a signal that it was safe to wake up. How many? Sarah checked the records. Hard to say, maybe 50,000. Humans total, spread across dozens of ships and locations. Not many, but enough. Enough for what? Enough to teach you how to fight a war. The display changed to show human military doctrine, training programs, weapon designs, tactical manuals written by people who had spent decades learning how to fight an enemy that seemed unbeatable. This is what we know, Sarah said. 47 years of hard-won knowledge about how to hurt the hive, how to disrupt its communications, how to use its strengths against it, how to win battles against impossible odds. She looked around the room at the gathered Caltharans. Their crystalline features reflected the light from the displays, making them look like living jewels. Beautiful, peaceful, unprepared for what was coming. But knowledge isn't enough, she continued. You need to change, all of you. Every race in this galaxy needs to understand that the age of peace is ending. What do you mean? Sarah called up images from the later stages of the war. Human soldiers modified with cybernetic implants. Training programs that would horrify most civilized beings. Weapons designed to cause maximum psychological impact. War changes you, she said simply. It has to. The enemy we're facing doesn't think like you do. It doesn't value individual life. It doesn't negotiate or compromise. It only understands strength. You're asking us to become like you, Commander Vexhai said. I'm asking you to survive. The hive is coming. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but it's coming. And when it arrives, you'll have two choices: fight or be consumed. And if we choose to fight? Sarah was quiet for a moment, remembering battles on distant worlds, friends who had died beside her, the gradual hardening of her heart as war consumed everything she had once cared about. Then you'll probably become monsters, she said finally, just like we did. But you'll be alive monsters, and that's better than being dead saints. The meeting ended with more questions than answers. The Caltharans needed time to process what they had learned, time to decide whether they could accept Sarah's harsh truths about their galaxy's future. But Sarah knew time was the one thing they didn't have. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, an ancient enemy was stirring. The hive had been patient for 3,000 years, but its patience was running out. Soon, the harvest would begin. And when it did, the galaxy would learn what humanity had learned long ago. Peace was a luxury that could be taken away in an instant. The only question was whether anyone would be left to remember the lesson. The alert came during the night cycle, when most of the Kaltharan crew was resting. Sarah Chen had been awake anyway, studying star charts and trying to plot possible locations for other human survivor ships. Sleep came hard when you had been unconscious for 3,000 years. Captain Chen to the bridge immediately, came Commander Vexhi's voice over the ship's communication system. Something in his tone made Sarah move faster than her still recovering body wanted to. She found the bridge in controlled chaos. Kaltharan officers moved between stations, their crystalline features bright with stress. The main display showed long-range sensor readings, but Sarah needed a moment to understand what she was seeing. "What am I looking at?" she asked. "Hyperspace. Distortions," Commander Vexhi replied. "Multiple large objects dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of this star system." Sarah studied the readings. The energy signatures were massive, far larger than anything the Kaltharans or any other race she knew about could produce. But there was something familiar about the patterns. "How many objects?" 15 confirmed, possibly more. The commander paused. "Captain, they match some of the energy signatures in your ship's database." Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. "Show me." The display split to compare the current sensor readings with files from the Perseverance's memory banks. The match was close but not exact. The new signatures were larger, more complex, but built on the same fundamental principles. "It's them," she whispered. "The hive. But they're bigger than they were." "Bigger?" 3,000 years bigger. They've been growing, learning, evolving. These ships are probably 10 times the size of anything we faced during the war. Commander Vexhi's features darkened. "Are they coming here?" Sarah watched the sensor displays as the unknown ships moved through the outer edges of the system. Their course was deliberate, methodical. They were scanning everything, cataloging resources, mapping defenses. "Yes," she said, "but not directly. They're being careful, gathering intelligence first." "Should we flee?" "Too late for that. They've already detected us." Sarah moved to the communication station. "I need to send a message to my ship immediately." "What kind of message?" "A wake-up call." Sarah's fingers moved quickly over the Kaltharan controls, adapting them to send a signal in human military codes. The message was short and simple. "General alert. Enemy contact. All personnel to battle stations." On the Perseverance, automated systems that had been dormant for millennia suddenly came alive. Emergency lighting bathed the hibernation bay in red as revival protocols began. One by one, the 1,000 sleeping humans began to wake. "You're reviving your entire crew?" Commander Vexhi asked. "All of them. If the hive is here, we're going to need every soldier we can get." The first human to fully wake was Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, Sarah's second in command. She watched. On the communication screen as he pulled himself out of his hibernation pod, his movements automatic and efficient despite having slept for 3,000 years. "Sit rep," he said into his communicator, his voice hoarse but alert. "Enemy contact at system perimeter," Sarah replied. "Hive vessels. Multiple contacts, larger than previous intelligence suggested." "Understood. Beginning crew revival and combat. Preparations." Watching Webb work, Sarah was reminded of why humans had survived as long as they had against the hive. Other species might need time to adjust after hibernation. They might need medical checks and psychological counseling. But humans were different. Humans woke up ready to fight. "Your people are remarkable," Commander Vexhi observed. "No," Sarah corrected. "We're just desperate. Desperation makes you fast." Within 2 hours, the Perseverance was fully operational. 1,000 human veterans moved through its corridors, checking systems, preparing weapons, turning the exploration vessel back into the warship it had once been. The transformation was disturbing to watch. Equipment that had seemed like scientific instruments revealed themselves to be weapon components. Storage areas opened to reveal military supplies. The ship's entire personality changed. "Captain," came Webb's voice over the communicator, "we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Our weapons are 3,000 years out of date. Whatever upgrades the hive has made, our old equipment probably won't be effective against them." Sarah had expected this. Then we improvise. What about the Calthuran ships? Their technology is more advanced than ours in some ways, but it's designed for peaceful purposes. Energy weapons optimized for mining. Shields designed to deflect space debris. Nothing built for actual combat. Can we modify them? Maybe, but we'd need their cooperation. Sarah looked at Commander Vexhai. Are you willing to let my people modify your ships for war? The Calthuran was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. Do what you must. What followed was a crash course in human military engineering. Teams from the Perseverance spread out among the 5 Calthuran vessels, working alongside confused alien crews to transform peaceful exploration ships into impromptu warships. The modifications were crude but effective. Mining lasers became anti-ship weapons. Cargo holds were converted into missile launchers. Scientific sensors were reprogrammed to track enemy movements. Within 12 hours, the small exploration fleet had become something that might actually fight back. But Sarah knew it wouldn't be enough. Not against what was coming. Captain, reported sensor operator Kim Nakamura, one of the humans now stationed on the Calthuran flagship. The hive ships are moving. They're coming directly toward us now. The main display showed the enemy vessels, approaching. As they got closer, the sensors revealed more details about their construction. The ships were unlike anything from the old war. They seemed to be grown rather than built, with organic curves and surfaces that shifted and moved like living tissue. They're beautiful, whispered one of the Calthuran officers. They're nightmares, Sarah corrected. Those organic components aren't decoration. They're biological systems integrated with the technology. The hive has learned to merge living beings with their machines. Merge how? Sarah didn't want to answer that question. She had seen hive biotechnology during the war, knew what happened to people who were captured and integrated into the enemy's systems. Their consciousness became part of the collective, but their bodies were used as living components in hive machinery. Incoming transmission, reported the communications officer. From the hive. Yes, Captain. It's on multiple frequencies. They're trying to establish contact. Sarah felt old memories stir. The hive always tried to communicate before attacking, not because they wanted to negotiate, but because they wanted to learn. Every conversation gave them more information about their enemies. Put it through, she ordered. The main screen flickered and suddenly they were looking at something that had once been human. The figure on the screen wore the uniform of a Colonial Defense Force admiral, but the face was wrong. Pale skin stretched tight over mechanical implants, eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. When it spoke, the voice was a harmony of different tones, as if multiple people were speaking in perfect unison. We greet the survivors, the hive spokesman said. We have waited long for this reunion. Sarah stepped forward. Admiral Rodriguez? The figure smiled, an expression made horrible by the mechanical components visible beneath its skin. We were Rodriguez. We are now much more. We are the voice of the collective. We speak for all who have joined us. Including the humans you consumed. Including the humans who became part of something greater. Their knowledge, their experiences, their skills, all preserved within us. They are not dead, Captain Chen. They are eternal. Sarah felt sick. Rodriguez had been a good officer, a decent man. Seeing him reduced to a mouthpiece for the enemy was almost unbearable. What do you want? She asked. What we have always wanted. Unity. The end of conflict through the joining of all consciousness into one perfect whole. You mean slavery. We mean peace. No more war. No more suffering. No more lonely individual existence. All beings joined in perfect harmony. The hive spokesman gestured, and the display changed to show images of worlds under hive control. Cities that looked like living organisms. Beings moving in perfect synchronization. Everything clean, efficient, peaceful. This is what we offer, the spokesman continued. This is what we have built during the long years since your people fled. Sarah looked at the images and saw only horror. A galaxy where every living thing moved to the same rhythm, where individual thought had been erased in favor of collective purpose, where peace existed only because no one was left to disagree. And if we refuse? Then you will be made to understand. We have grown strong in the centuries since last we met. We have learned much from the humans we absorbed. Your tactics, your weapons, your psychology, all part of us now. The image changed again, showing the approaching hive fleet in detail. 15 massive vessels, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. Around them, smaller ships, moved in perfect formation, thousands of them like a swarm of deadly insects. You cannot resist, the spokesman said, but you can choose to join willingly. Make this easy for yourself and your allies. Sarah looked around the bridge at the Caltharan crew. Their crystalline features showed fear, but also determination. These peaceful beings had chosen to stand with humanity, even knowing what it might cost them. We need time to consider, Sarah said. You have one of your hours, the spokesman replied. Then we will take what we have come for. The transmission ended, leaving them staring at the tactical display. 15 massive hive ships against 5 modified Caltharan vessels and 1 ancient human warship. The odds were impossible. Well, said Commander Vexhai, what do we do now? Sarah looked at the display, her mind racing through possibilities. Direct confrontation would be suicide. They couldn't outrun the enemy. They couldn't hide. But maybe we give them what they don't expect, she said finally, which is a fight they can't predict. The hive thinks it knows everything about human tactics because it absorbed our people. But those humans fought the old hive. This is different. She turned to address both her human crew and the Caltharans. The hive expects us to fight like soldiers, like the military units it consumed during the war. But we're not just soldiers anymore. We're survivors. We've been thinking about this enemy for 3,000 years, and we've had time to come up with new ideas. What kind of ideas? Webb asked over the communicator. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since waking up, it was a real smile. Crazy, puns. The kind that might actually work. The next hour would determine whether the galaxy had a future of freedom or would join the perfect, horrible unity of the hive. Sarah intended to make sure the enemy remembered why humans were the species that had given them their hardest fight, even if it killed every one of them in the process. Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Caltharan flagship watching death approach. The hive fleet moved through space like a dark tide, their biomechanical ships pulsing with organic rhythms that made her skin crawl. 15 massive vessels, each one carrying enough firepower to sterilize a planet. Against them, 6 ships crewed by beings who had never fought a real war. Final preparations complete, reported Lieutenant Colonel Webb from the Perseverance. All human personnel distributed among the fleet, weapon systems modified and ready. Sarah nodded. Her 1,000 soldiers were now scattered across the Caltharan ships, each one turning their assigned vessel into something the enemy wouldn't expect. The modifications were crude but clever, the kind of battlefield engineering that humans had perfected during the long war. Commander Vexhai, she said, are your people ready for this? The Caltharan leader's crystalline features were dim with stress, but his voice was steady. As ready as we can be. My crews understand their roles. Sarah hoped so. The plan was insane, even by human standards. It relied on the enemy's overconfidence and the hive's inability to truly understand individual creativity. During the war, the hive had learned to predict human military tactics by absorbing human soldiers. But those soldiers had been trained to follow doctrine, to fight by the book. The humans aboard these ships had spent 3,000 years dreaming of revenge. They had no book to follow anymore. Hive fleet is in weapons range, reported Sensor Operator Nakamura. They're scanning us, probably trying to identify our capabilities. Let them look, Sarah said. They won't see what's really coming. The enemy flagship sent another transmission. The same horrible fusion of Admiral Rodriguez appeared on screen, its mechanical eyes studying them with inhuman patience. Your hour is complete, it said. What is your decision? Sarah stepped forward. We choose to fight. Then you choose extinction. We had hoped the humans might show wisdom after their long exile. We're full of surprises. The Hive spokesman smiled, an expression made grotesque by the machinery visible beneath its skin. We think not. We know your tactics. We absorbed the memories of 10,000 human soldiers. Your Colonel Martinez taught us much about your fleet formations. Captain Singh showed us your preferred attack patterns. Admiral Chen, your own predecessor, revealed your deepest strategic thinking. Sarah felt cold at hearing those names. Officers she had known, friends who had been consumed by the enemy and turned into sources of intelligence. They fought well, the spokesman continued, but they fought predictably, as do you now. Defensive formation Sigma 7, with your strongest ship positioned, to cover the others. You will attempt to use the Kaltharan vessels as shields while your warship seeks a flanking position. Sarah said nothing, but inside she was amazed. The Hive was exactly right. That was precisely what traditional human doctrine would call for in this situation. Your ammunition reserves are limited, the spokesman went on. Your modified weapons will overheat after sustained fire. Your alien allies will break formation once casualties mount. You have perhaps 15 minutes of effective combat capability before your forces collapse. 14 minutes longer than we need, Sarah replied. We shall see. The transmission ended. The Hive fleet began to move, their ships spreading into the attack formation that had destroyed 100 human fleets during the war. Perfect spacing, overlapping fields of fire, methodical, efficient, unstoppable. All ships, Sarah announced, on the fleet-wide channel. Execute Plan Madness. What happened next would have horrified any properly trained military officer. Instead of maintaining defensive formation, the 6 ships scattered in completely different directions. The Perseverance dove toward the largest Hive vessel, its weapons blazing. 2 Kaltharan ships accelerated directly into the enemy formation. The other 3 ships split up and began random evasive maneuvers that followed no tactical pattern at all. To any conventional analysis, it looked like panic, like a complete breakdown of command structure. The Hive fleet adjusted their formation to deal with the expected chaos, positioning themselves to pick off the scattered vessels one by one. They had no idea what was really happening. Now! Sarah shouted. Aboard the Perseverance, Sergeant Santos triggered the first surprise. The old human warship had been modified during their exile, its cargo holds packed with improvised explosives. But instead of ramming the enemy ship, Santos ejected the entire payload at the last second and veered away. The Hive vessel's defensive systems ignored the debris, focusing on the ship they thought was the real threat. The cargo of explosives detonated inside the enemy's defensive perimeter, tearing through their shields and opening holes in their armor. At the same moment, the seemingly panicked Kaltharan ships revealed their true purpose. Each one had been turned into a massive kinetic weapon. Their cargo holds were packed with dense metals and accelerated to ramming speed. But instead of hitting the enemy ships directly, they aimed for the weak points that Santos's explosives had created. The impact sent shockwaves through the Hive vessels, disrupting their organic systems and causing chain reactions throughout their biological components. 3 enemy ships disabled, reported Webb. Heavy damage to 2 more. But the Hive adapted quickly. The remaining ships changed formation, spreading out to prevent further ramming attacks. Their weapons began targeting the scattered human vessels with deadly accuracy. Phase 2, Sarah ordered. This was where the real insanity began. The humans had studied Hive psychology for 3,000 years, learning to think like their enemy. The Hive believed in perfection, in harmony, in systems that worked together flawlessly. They couldn't comprehend true chaos, so the humans gave them chaos. Every ship began broadcasting different signals, false sensor readings, fake communications, decoy transponders that made one ship look like 10. The electromagnetic spectrum filled with noise, making it impossible for the Hive to get clear targeting solutions. At the same time, small teams of humans began moving between ships using personal thruster packs. They carried improvised weapons, mining charges turned into space mines, communications equipment modified into jamming devices, even personal belongings rigged to explode. The Hive tried to track these individual movements, but their collective consciousness wasn't designed to handle hundreds of separate, irrational actions happening simultaneously. They were used to fighting organized fleets, not swarms of individual madmen. Enemy formation is breaking down, observed Commander Vexhai with amazement. Their ships are getting in each other's way. Sarah watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The Hive ships were still more powerful, but they were designed to work as part of a coordinated whole. When that coordination broke down, they became vulnerable. "Hit them now," she ordered. While they're confused, the human teams scattered through space began their final attacks. Sergeant Martinez led a squad that planted explosives on a Hive ship's sensor array, blinding it at a crucial moment. Corporal Johnson used a modified mining laser to cut through another vessel's armor, creating an opening for Lieutenant Okafor to plant a nuclear charge inside their reactor core. It was messy, improvised, and completely unpredictable. Everything the Hive couldn't handle. But it was also costly. Human teams were dying with each attack. The modified Kaltharan ships were taking massive damage. Even the Perseverance was losing atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. "Sarah," came Webb's voice, strained with pain. "We can't keep this up much longer." She knew. They had maybe 5 more minutes before their improvised fleet fell apart completely. But 5 minutes might be enough. "All remaining teams," she announced, "execute final protocol." This was the last card they had to play, the most desperate gamble of all. The remaining humans abandoned their ships entirely, using every thruster pack, every escape pod, every piece of mobile equipment to create one final chaotic assault on the enemy flagship. 100 humans in space, suits moving in completely random patterns, each one carrying whatever weapons they could find. To the Hive's sensors, it looked like madness. To Sarah, it looked like humanity's last hope. The Hive flagship tried to target the individual attackers, but there were too many of them moving in too many directions. Its point defense systems, designed to stop incoming missiles, couldn't handle targets that changed direction randomly every few seconds. Captain Lee reached the flagship first, using a mining charge to blow a hole in its outer hull. Sergeant Kim followed, tossing improvised grenades through the opening. One by one, the human attackers breached the enemy ship's defenses, fighting their way inside with nothing but personal weapons and desperate courage. "Multiple hull breaches on enemy flagship," reported Nakamura. "Their biosystems are failing." Sarah watched as the massive Hive vessel began to list, its organic components dying as they were exposed to vacuum. But the cost had been enormous. Most of her people were dead or dying, scattered across space in the wreckage of their improvised attack. "Captain," came a weak transmission. It was Rodriguez. Not the Hive-modified version, but the real Admiral. Rodriguez, his consciousness somehow freed from the collective during the chaos. "Sarah, can you hear me?" "I hear you, Admiral. The flagship's main computer core is exposed. If someone could reach it with a significant explosive charge." His voice faded in and out as he fought to maintain control of his augmented body. Sarah looked at the tactical display. The flagship was crippled but not destroyed. If it survived, it would call for reinforcements. The entire Hive fleet would come, and this time they would be ready for human tactics. "Webb," she called to her second-in-command. "Status of the Perseverance?" "Main drives offline. Weapons systems failing. Life support compromised. We're a dead ship, Captain." Sarah nodded. She had known it would come to this. "Set course for the enemy flagship. Ramming speed." "Sarah, no," Webb protested. "There has to be another way." "There is no other way. The Perseverance still has her reactor core intact. If we ram their computer center, the explosion should take out their entire command structure. That's suicide. That's war." Sarah made her way to the Perseverance, moving through corridors filled with smoke and the smell of burning electronics. The ship was dying around her, but its heart was still strong. The reactor that had powered them for 3,000 years had enough energy left for one final act. "All hands abandon ship," she announced over the communication system. "This is Captain Chen. It has been an honor serving with all of you. But as she reached the bridge, she found she wasn't alone. Lieutenant Colonel Webb was there, along with a dozen other humans who had refused to leave. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Our job," Webb replied simply. "Someone needs to make sure this ship hits its target. And someone needs to make sure the enemy remembers what happens when they threaten humanity." Sarah looked around at her crew. These were people who had followed her across the galaxy, who had slept for 3,000 years waiting for a chance to strike back at their enemy. They deserved better than to die in a suicide attack. But they also deserved to choose their own ending. "All right then," she said. "Let's finish this." The Perseverance, its hull cracked and its systems failing, began its final approach toward the Hive flagship. Enemy weapons fire struck them again and again, but the old ship held together through sheer stubborn determination. 30 seconds to impact," Webb reported. Sarah opened a channel to the remaining Caltheran ships. "Commander Vexhai, this is Captain Chen. When this is over, the galaxy will need to remember what happened here. The Hive can be beaten, but only if people are willing to fight for their freedom." "We will remember," came the reply. "Your sacrifice will not be forgotten." "Tell them." Sarah paused, watching the enemy ship grow larger on the view screen. "Tell them that humanity never learned how to surrender. We only learned how to make the enemy pay a price they couldn't afford." The Perseverance struck the Hive flagship at full speed, its reactor core breaching at the moment of impact. The explosion tore through both ships, sending shockwaves across the system. When the light faded, nothing remained of either vessel but expanding clouds of debris. The surviving Hive ships, cut off from their command structure, began to withdraw. Without the flagship's coordination, they couldn't maintain their perfect formation. They retreated to regroup, leaving the shattered remains of the small fleet behind. "Victory," whispered Commander Vexhai, staring at the debris field where 2 massive ships had just died. "No," came a weak transmission from one of the escape pods. It was Sergeant Santos, badly injured, but alive. "Not victory, just a warning. The Hive will be back, and next time they'll be ready for our tricks." Vexhai coordinated the rescue of the surviving humans, less than 200 out of the original 1,000. As they recovered the wounded and counted the dead, he began to understand what Sarah Chen had meant about the cost of war. These humans had saved his fleet, possibly his entire civilization, but the price had been enormous. Most of them were dead, and those who survived were forever changed by what they had done. "What happens now?" he asked Santos as they recovered her from the escape pod. The sergeant looked out at the stars, her eyes holding the same hardness that Sarah Chen's had shown. "Now we prepare for the real war. This was just the first battle. The Hive will send more ships, bigger fleets, and when they come, the galaxy better be ready. Will you help us prepare?" Santos nodded slowly. "It's what we do. It's all we've ever known how to do." As the rescue ships gathered the survivors, Commander Vexhai sent a message to the Caltheran homeworld. It was a simple message, but it would change everything. The age of peace is over. The war for survival has begun. Send word to every world, every race, every being who values their freedom. Learn from the humans. Learn to fight. Learn that some things are worth dying for. In the debris field where the Perseverance had made its final stand, pieces of metal and crystal drifted slowly apart. But the example they represented would spread across the galaxy, carrying with it a simple message. Humanity had returned, and they remembered how to make their enemies pay.